you privately argue for a plan, for this plan and not the target? Was that your... Because the word out of the government was suggesting that you weren't supportive of a hard target. The Prime Minister was. Is that true?
I'm supportive of this goal, this target and this plan, Kieran, and people say all sorts of things, but that's what I support, and I support it because it's in keeping with liberal national principles. It's in keeping with respecting Australians' choices. It's in keeping with not raising the price of electricity.
But you weren't convinced on the target throughout?
No, I've always been convinced. I've always been convinced that if you can get emissions down, keeping true to those principles, supporting traditional industries like agriculture, heavy industry and mining, as long as you can do that, then you should do it. I mean, reducing emissions while supporting our traditional industries, putting downward pressure on the cost of electricity and energy, that is a good outcome. It's hard to argue with it. That's always been my position. This plan does exactly that, Kieran, and that's why I support it so strongly.
On the 2030 projections, which, as you and the PM say, meet and beat those modest 26 to 28% targets, how much does the state commitments, like New South Wales, how much does that factor in to that reduction? Because New South Wales is going to halve their emissions by 2030.
Well, we take notice of the policies, but most of all, we take notice of what people are choosing to do. That's what drives our projections, choices. So if Australians are choosing to put solar on their roofs, we recognise that. Now, they're doing it at record rates, the highest level in the world. The highest level in the world. Australians are choosing to deploy energy efficiency in pubs and in agricultural farming businesses, and you name it, Kieran, we're seeing Australians making those choices. The way you bring down emissions, the way you strengthen an economy, the way you create jobs is to trust the Australian people to make choices that are good for them and good for the economy. It's working. It'll continue to work. There's the Labor approach.
How much does the New South Wales government target, though, factor into that?
Well, as I said, I've already said, we take notice of real policies and real choices. That's what we take notice of. There's lots of people with targets. There's lots of countries with targets. Many of those targets we see around the world now for 2050 are targets without a plan. We constantly see from the Labor Party targets without a plan.
But it's a Liberal government plan.
It doesn't matter, Kieran. We take notice of how. And the how that works is trusting Australians to make choices that are good for them, to deliver them over time through investment in R&D, technologies that they can choose that bring down emissions and are good for them. That's the way to do this. And that is the Australian way. It's been working. It'll keep working.
A couple of quick ones before we go. I know you've got a busy day ahead, but the Deputy Prime Minister, he's not convinced. He argued in the National Party room against a target. So doesn't that undermine the plan?
So Barnaby Joyce has made very clear that as a member of a government, he strongly supports the policy. He's unambiguous on that. But it is right and proper that all regional MPs, I'm one of them, that look at this very closely and say for regional industries, most of this activity is happening, not all of it, but much of it is happening in regional areas. And so it's really crucial that all regional members are able to look at this, understand it, get their heads around it, and make sure that the regions and the jobs in those regions are being supported and enabled by this plan. That's exactly what it does. That's why we have support from the government. I mean, this is a very important step forward, Kieran, that it's a sensible plan. It's a plan that's in keeping with Liberal national principles, and that's why we have the support from across the Liberal and National Party to get on and do this in a way which strengthens Australia, not weakens it.
Many people in the bush will clean up in this new economy, won't they?
Well, there's opportunities there. There's no doubt about it. I mean, if you look at critical minerals, export of copper and development of further resources in copper and lithium and nickel and so on. In agriculture, look, you've got 90 million hectares of agricultural land that is a carbon sink and can be a much bigger one. And we know that. It's very clear. And that just means more productive soils, regenerating our soils where they've been run down. Huge opportunity for Australia. That's good for farmers, good for Australia, good for the world. Let's do it.
I know you've been having a crack at Labor throughout our discussion. That's not a surprise. But I'll put it to you that argument will be diminished this election compared to last election. If you look at the New South Wales Liberal government, it's very ambitious 2030 target. The BCA's ambitious 2030 target. The NFF, the Meat and Livestock,
Kieran,
all these groups are now supporting ambitious action. So it's really going to not fly, is it, to be having a crack at an ambitious Labor target?
Well, Kieran, the only entity that signs up to an international agreement is a national government. That's who signs up. That's who's accountable. We choose to put out every quarter our emissions across every sector and every gas. Right? No state government comes even close to that. No corporate yet comes even close to that. Now, that's accountability. It's real. Now, Labor has to decide whether they're going to get real about this and how they're going to get real about it. The one thing we know about Labor is they can't help themselves. They want to be central planners. They want to tell people what kind of car to drive. They want to tell people what kind of food to eat. They won't be able to help themselves because the left is there. Jed Carney, the member for Cooper, she's out there telling people you can't have gas barbecues. This is how they think, Kieran. And you know what? That is not how we think, and it's not how the Australian people think, and I think that's going to be abundantly clear over the coming months in the lead up to the next election.
Mr. Taylor, I appreciate your time, as always. Thanks.
Good on you. Thanks, Kieran.